Well, I think that today would be a good day to reflect on what's happened so far with this whole, post George Floyd movement thing, and try and figure out where exactly we're going to go from here. Because most of what I've been discussing, except for maybe the first day of talking about this, all of the unrest in America, I've been sort of dealing with it in a reactive way, day to day, looking at what happened the day before and what might happen the next day. But I think that I've gotten too in the weeds on this, so I need to take a step back and reflect on the whole situation and try and figure out, what long term we're looking at, which is what I tried to do on the first day, if you remember, because when the riots initially broke out in Minneapolis, I was talking about the economy. I was saying how the economic collapse was making civil unrest a very high possibility. That when people are downtrodden and unemployed and poor and hit on hard times, they're kind of just looking for a good excuse to go out and express their rage. And I think it's important that we still point to that. All of this unrest is not over, certainly not over the death of one man, and no, it's not over just over racism, because racism is such a phantom phenomenon in America these days. I grew up in the South surrounded by mostly white people, and you just don't meet that many actually racist people who are under the age of 65. In fact, I don't think I've ever met any racist people that were not elderly. And that's because, our culture universally abhors racism anyway. At least if you're white. You can get away with it if you're not white, being racist against white people because, that's just seen as payback. And revenge is something that our culture doesn't have much of a problem with. But actually, listening to the leftists talk about, what racism means to them reveals just how much, just how little racism actually has to do with what's going on and what these people are angry about. Because when they talk about what racism is, they point to economic disparity. They talk about how black people are poor, and they say that's racism. So they've essentially taken the term racism, which, a normal person would perceive to mean, hey, you're discriminating against someone because they're black, or you don't like them because they're black. And they've taken that and redefined it as, what is a more current issue. Now, beyond the economic issues, which I'm not going to get into any great detail in this video because that would be the whole video and multiple videos if I really wanted to get into a decent amount of detail. Beyond that, you have the underlying cultural issues, which I don't know how many people have really used the term culture war in the last couple of years. It seems to have faded from the public discourse, but it is still alive and well. And this unrest is indicative of that. These are a symptom of the cultural divisions in America, because there's a pretty fundamental difference between people who think that America basically is a bad place and people who think that America is basically a good place. And so, in that sense, we don't have any sort of a common American society, as I've detailed in the past. For all practical purposes, America is not one country in the sense that the masses would think of it. Of course, it is a country in terms of being a political entity. But when most people think of a country, they think of something that has a lot of things in common. Similar geography, similar culture, of course, similar language, a dialect, similar ways of life. And the fact of the matter is that depending on where you grow up in the United States, you're going to have a very different life experience. So if you grow up in a not so nice part of Chicago or St. Louis or LA or something like that, and your experience of quote unquote America is growing up in a rough part of town, well, then you're going to think, well, America kind of sucks because my life kind of sucks. And if you grow up in a relatively nice part of the country in a decent neighborhood, and are able to do well in school and get an okay job where you're getting by, you'd think, hey, America's a pretty great country. And so everyone's idea of, what the real America is just wherever they grew up. That to them is the real America. And so the way that, quote unquote, American society has been able to coexist for so long, despite the fact that there's so much, actual diversity. And I don't mean using diversity as a euphemism for non-white people. I mean actual diversity of experience and things like that throughout the country. People abstract all those things away and have just sort of this vague idea of America. But everyone in their head, is thinking of something different. When the mask comes off and it's revealed that there is no real America, is when people start talking about their various experiences. And, the folks who are, in the streets talk about why they don't like America. And, what they're saying just doesn't match up with the experiences of so many other people. These are irreconcilable differences. And what it shows is that there are huge divisions in this society, and in fact there is no such thing as a single American society. The founding fathers understood this. They didn't believe in this idea of one giant blob of America. That's why we didn't have much of a central government to begin with. But that's been lost over the centuries and the decades. The President of the United States has become sort of the avatar of the American people, so to speak. And Washington is supposed to be able to solve all of our problems, whereas, that has exacerbated the differences, amongst different people in this country, because, the fact of the matter is that, each locality is a very different place. Different parts of the country have different problems and different ways of solving those problems. And so if you try to have a national discourse on anything, on any issue, you're going to get a lot of division between Americans. When some folks in some small towns with rather friendly police departments, with maybe only a few officers that everybody knows, say, hey, we gotta back the blue because we don't like our friends being derided and things like that and threatened by rioters, that gets a backlash from folks in, say, big cities who have not so friendly police departments, who say we just got to abolish the cops altogether. And so this is just one example of how having a national political system in America is so detrimental. Because people are not just divided on the issue of policing, they're divided on everything else too. And it's our national politics that has exacerbated the tensions between people across this country, and has created so much tension that is to a certain extent being unleashed. But make no mistake, if there wasn't all of this built-up tension in America, well then the death of one man could not unleash such a reaction. And so moving forward, I would expect more occurrences such as this one. More instances where you have, a rash of riots, and then maybe after that, mass protests in the streets over different political issues, not just this whole policing thing. I don't know necessarily how this is going to turn out, what the resolution will be to this current situation, but I think that once the precedent is set, that now that we've created a culture of where national politics rules the day, we're going to have nationwide protests and potentially more nationwide rioting, because our political system is not built anymore. It's been modified to the extent that it can no longer serve to sustain social cohesion in this country. And so the only recourse that people have left is to get out in the streets, because voting does not work. Voting harder is not going to get you what you want. As some folks have pointed out, what are folks in these inner cities supposed to do? They've already elected Democrats to every position in the city, and that hasn't, in their view, stopped the cops from oppressing them. So what are they going to do? Elect Republicans, who are supposed to be the pro-police party? And this is true not just for, black Democrats in the inner city. This is true for, most constituencies across America who have any sort of issue that they care about. Whether it's, guns is a good example. Think about the people who want to preserve or, reclaim some of what's been lost of their Second Amendment rights, and those who want to constrict them. Neither of those people are very happy with their politicians. And so there's many issues in this country which cannot be resolved by our political system, which, now that we've seen this sort of a reaction may lead to these mass movements in the streets. And so general unrest is probably something that we can expect in the future. Unrest over all sorts of different issues. Because I currently see no path to quelling the anger that exists in this country. And there's certainly no one on the national stage who could unite people in this country. That's just a joke. We don't have leaders in this country. I've been saying this week that, to me, the reason why the riots stopped seems to be because leaders took control of the mob and compelled them to remain peaceful and tried to discipline them to keep from carrying out acts of violence. Well, there is no such person to do that on the national level. No one can rein in the national mob. And that means that all of this discord in our society is going to continue and intensify. So with that said, if you gained anything of value to this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.